Numbers don't panic, people do. Let's look at the psychology driving today's market. A price sequence can contain real information, random variation, or both, while the observer still experiences a coherent pattern. The puzzle is not whether patterns exist. Some relationships can be meaningful. The difficulty is deciding whether a visible arrangement contains durable information or only resembles one. Market participants face an unusual environment: constant movement, abundant explanations, and repeated opportunities to connect one event with another after both have already occurred. Visual simplicity can conceal complicated selection decisions. Pattern matching helps organize that complexity, but it can also create confidence before the proposed relationship has survived comparison, repetition, and alternative explanations. Context determines whether a relationship can plausibly persist. The opening question asks how signals emerge from noise in collective interpretation. The answer involves attention, selection, storytelling, and social reinforcement rather than one isolated bias. This episode does not dismiss technical or statistical analysis. It separates disciplined testing from the psychological ease of seeing meaningful order in a limited sequence. Structural causes must remain visible beside psychological interpretation. A pattern begins with selection. From countless possible prices, intervals, assets, events, and comparisons, an observer chooses a small set that appears related. Mechanism and measurement must support each other. That choice may be reasonable, but it creates a hidden problem. The observer sees the selected arrangement more clearly than the many alternatives that were ignored. Notice the distinction. Finding a pattern and testing a pattern are different tasks. Recognition generates a candidate explanation. Validation asks whether it survives conditions designed to challenge it. Without that second step, coincidence can inherit the emotional force of discovery. The arrangement feels found rather than constructed, even when several choices shaped its appearance. The same data can support many possible stories. Changing the starting point, interval, comparison group, or definition may reveal a different relationship with equal visual appeal. The crowd creates the feedback. One participant identifies a pattern, others repeat it. Repetition increases attention, and increased attention can make the pattern appear more important. Apophenia is a useful conceptual term for perceiving meaningful connections in ambiguous or unrelated material. In markets, the concern is not perception alone but the confidence attached to it. A weak pattern can become persuasive when it fits an existing narrative. The observer already expects a reversal, breakout, panic, or recovery, so selected movement feels like confirmation. Confirmation then guides further selection. Evidence supporting the story receives attention, while contradictory intervals or examples are treated as exceptions, temporary distortions, or irrelevant noise. Data choices can influence which relationships appear strongest. This creates a self-protecting interpretation. The pattern explains favorable cases, while unfavorable cases are assigned to conditions outside the pattern's supposed domain. Repeated exposure can increase familiarity without increasing evidence. Pattern flexibility is therefore a warning. If definitions change after repeated failure, the relationship may remain verbally convincing without becoming analytically testable. Familiarity may then be mistaken for independent confirmation. Another mechanism is hindsight coherence. Once an outcome is known, earlier movements can be arranged into a story that appears to point toward the result. Out-of-sample comparison can expose hidden dependence on selection. Now, the same earlier movements may have supported several other outcomes before the result occurred. Hindsight removes those abandoned branches from attention. Testing should challenge the pattern rather than decorate it. Sequence also creates causal temptation. When one event follows another, the mind can connect them even when both reflect a third factor or merely coincide. Failure to replicate should reduce confidence rather than move definitions. In markets, this can produce stories linking news, price, volume, commentary, and sentiment without a clearly specified transmission mechanism. Selection therefore shapes what becomes available for interpretation. A transmission mechanism matters because it explains how one condition could influence another. Without it, the relationship may remain descriptive rather than causal. Social repetition can amplify confidence faster than scrutiny. Even a plausible mechanism does not prove persistence. Market relationships can weaken as incentives change, participants adapt, or the surrounding conditions differ. A useful hypothesis must survive clearly defined failure conditions. Here is the feedback loop. A perceived signal attracts participation. Participation affects transactions, and the resulting movement can temporarily make the original signal appear validated. This is reflexive rather than purely illusory. A belief about a pattern may influence behavior, so the pattern can matter socially even if its original informational basis was weak. Price is evidence of transactions, not a direct reading of belief. Similar movement can arise from hedging, liquidity needs, fundamental revision, mechanical rules, or shared interpretation. Statistical testing addresses part of the problem by comparing observed relationships with alternatives. Yet testing itself depends on choices about samples, variables, and evaluation criteria. A result can look strong inside one selected period and weaken elsewhere. That does not automatically make it useless, but it narrows the conditions under which confidence is justified. Multiple comparison problems arise conceptually when many patterns are searched and only the most impressive result is remembered. Chance can produce an attractive winner among numerous attempts. Publication is not required for this effect. A single participant can test many arrangements privately, forget the failures, and become attached to the surviving pattern. Social media can intensify selection by rewarding concise, striking explanations. A clean pattern is easier to share than a careful account of uncertainty and failed alternatives. Look. Attention then becomes evidence in the group's eyes. Popularity can be mistaken for independent confirmation even when many participants are repeating the same original observation. Pattern language also creates authority. Terms suggesting cycles, levels, formations, or recurring behavior can sound precise before their definitions and failure conditions are made explicit. Precision of vocabulary is not precision of prediction. A clearly named pattern may still have uncertain boundaries, inconsistent interpretation, and limited relevance outside its original context. The crowd creates the feedback. Participants who share the same interpretation may enter, exit, wait, or hedge around similar conditions. That gap is central to responsible market analysis. That coordination can influence short-term transactions, yet it does not establish that the pattern reveals fundamental value or predicts the next movement. Changing definitions after failure weakens analytical credibility. A structural explanation may dominate. Repeated movement could reflect market design, scheduled flows, liquidity provision, financing constraints, or genuine information rather than cognitive bias. Precise language can still describe an unstable relationship. Some patterns are statistically meaningful and economically explainable. Broadly dismissing recurring relationships as illusion would be as careless as accepting every attractive arrangement as signal. A rational participant may use a pattern as one input among several, with explicit uncertainty, defined conditions, and willingness to revise when performance changes. Conditional usefulness should not be presented as broad validity. Another limitation is adaptation. A relationship can weaken after participants recognize and act on it, so past validity does not guarantee future usefulness. Popularity does not reveal how many independent tests occurred. Data quality also matters. Missing observations, changing definitions, survivorship, and selective comparison can create apparent order without any psychological mechanism. Alternative arrangements may remain invisible outside the chosen view. Psychological interpretation is strongest when confidence exceeds the testing performed, especially when failure conditions remain vague and contradictory cases are repeatedly excluded. Multiple stories can fit the same limited sequence. A validating conceptual case is scattered mineral material viewed through a narrow glass frame. The frame reveals one striking arrangement while hiding many surrounding alternatives. The metaphor shows the selection problem. The arrangement may be real within the frame, but its importance cannot be judged without examining what the frame excluded. The opening question can now be answered. Signals appear in noise when selective attention finds an arrangement, narrative gives it meaning, and repetition gives it social weight. The problem is not pattern recognition itself. It is the jump from visual or narrative coherence to confidence that the relationship is durable, causal, and actionable. Collective reinforcement can make that jump feel safer. When many participants repeat the same pattern, individual doubt may decline even though the underlying evidence has not changed. Emotion can amplify the move. Excitement makes discovery memorable, fear makes warnings compelling, and regret can encourage participants to reinterpret missed movement as an obvious prior signal. Still, shared pattern matching does not reliably predict direction. It may affect participation, but liquidity, fundamentals, constraints, and new information continue to shape transactions. Real signals may coexist with substantial random variation. The strongest conclusion is methodological. A proposed signal needs a mechanism. A defined test, alternative explanations, failure conditions, and examination outside the interval where it was discovered. This perspective protects both skepticism and openness. It allows real relationships to survive testing while preventing attractive stories from receiving confidence merely because they look coherent. Now, application begins by asking how the pattern was selected. Which starting points, intervals, variables, and comparisons were chosen, and which alternatives were left unseen. Then ask what would count as failure. A pattern that absorbs contradictory outcomes after reinterpretation cannot meaningfully distinguish signal from noise. Coherence alone cannot establish durability or causal relevance. Study the herd without following it. Notice whether popularity reflects independent testing or repeated circulation of one visually persuasive idea. Recognition can feel immediate while validation remains unfinished. Compare psychological and structural explanations. A recurring movement may reflect shared interpretation, but it may also arise from rules, incentives, liquidity, or fundamental information. Noise can also contain temporary relationships created by participation. Ask whether the proposed mechanism connects the pattern to transactions. A resemblance without a transmission path should receive less confidence than a relationship with clear conditions. Behavioral analysis remains educational. It cannot certify a signal, reject an entire analytical method, or provide an entry, exit, target, or prediction. The chosen story may simply receive the strongest attention. Observe the behavior, not the prediction. Use the framework to test confidence, selection, and social reinforcement while preserving uncertainty about any specific market relationship. That possibility complicates any clean signal-noise division. The practical implication is disciplined friction. Slow the leap from recognition to belief. Compare alternatives, define failure, and separate a useful hypothesis from a compelling picture. Patterns deserve neither worship nor automatic dismissal. They deserve tests strong enough to challenge the story built around them. Don't follow the herd, study it. See you next time.